readers, you're listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we bring you insights and inspirations for growing your self-publishing business. We're your hosts. I'm Joni.
And I'm Stephanie.
Our guest this week is Brooke Adams Law, who is a writer and writing teacher. Her first novel, Catchlight, won the Fairfield Book Prize in 2019 and is being published this month by Woodhall Press.
So Brooke talked to us about how it took 13 years to publish her book, from initial idea to traditional publication. She talked to us about how she leads writing retreats, and she kind of went in depth on why she decided to get an MFA in writing and how that program actually helped her publish her first book. She talked to us about an approach called Embodied writing that helps you ground your writing in visceral detail, and also how to manage your thoughts from writing process, from initial idea through to marketing and launch. So we covered a lot of topics, but it was a great interview. We loved talking to Brooke. So here is the full interview. Thank you, Brooke, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a bit about yourself and how about your journey to publication?
Yeah, awesome. So again, my name is Brooke Adams Law, and I am a writer based in Connecticut. So we're recording this during kind of COVID-19 craziness. So things are a little wild, but going okay. I have two little kids. My son is almost 4 and my daughter is 10 months old. So keeping up a writing practice with little ones has been definitely an interesting journey. But yeah, I wanted to share a little bit about my journey to my book publication, which is right now still set for October 2020. My publisher and I are talking about possibly pushing it back until the spring, but the date right now is still October 1st of 2020, so we'll see what happens with that. But it's so funny. So I first had the idea for this book in 2007, and I had just graduated from college, and I started writing some ideas, and it basically came out of, I was reading this book with an older narrator. I think the narrator was in her 80s, and my grandmother had just died of Alzheimer's disease. And so I sort of asked myself this question, what if there's an older character? So the book I was reading was someone remembering their life and sort of processing all of their different experiences. And I was really interested in this question of who are we if we don't have our memory, right? So who are we if you reach the end of your life and you kind of don't have that ability to kind of process what your life has meant and to sort of make meaning from all the things you've experienced. So I started writing, and I was so afraid to even say that I was writing a novel that I was just I'm writing this thing that maybe someday could possibly be a book. I was just sort of really nervous about it, which is kind of funny now. So I spent about 2 years working on it, and I ended up with a draft. And I was I know that it can be better, but I have no idea how to make it better. So I spent a year sort of just playing around with it, but knowing I just don't know what to do with it, right? So I decided to do an MFA program with the goal of rewriting the book while I was there and just sort of learning what I could and sort of recrafting it. So basically my first semester, I was I'm going to just start over. So I took the book, I started over at page 1, and there were a lot of things that kind of came back in, but there was a lot of stuff that I was that just doesn't need to come back in at all. So my thesis at the end of the program was about the first 100 pages, super solid of the book. And I spent the next year after the MFA kind of finishing it and polishing it. Then I spent probably a year or 2 years querying agents. I think I queried about 110 agents, and I had some people look at it, but nobody wanted to take it on. And then I put it away for kind of a while, and I was just I wanted to work on something new. That's right. Somebody had told me I might look at it again if you rewrite it and take this, and this out. And I was just I've already rewritten it 3 times. And unless you told me that you were going to sign me, I'm not going to rewrite it on spec to possibly get you to represent me. So I put it away for a little while, and I applied for a couple of contests here and there. And in 2019, the book won the Fairfield Book Prize. And I was totally knocked over because I'd kind of forgotten about it. Actually, the day that I got the email, my daughter was 10 days old, and I got this email that was hey, did you see our email from 2 days ago that you won, you won the Fairfield Book Prize. And so the prize was basically a book deal with a small local press. And yeah, and it's so exciting now, we're almost a year after finding that out, getting to be working on the cover and be working on I'm about to go through the copy editor's notes notes, and just kind of being finally on the road to publication is really exciting.
That sounds so cool. I don't think we've had anyone win a contest like that before. Yeah.
Super
also
fun.
to win when you had a newborn as well.
I know.
Great. Like you're already emotionally all over the place, I assume. And then to have this, it's so cool.
Literally, I was opened my email on my phone because I was looking for something specific. Like I was not checking email at that stage. And I opened the email and I just like burst into tears. And my husband was like, what's wrong? Like what happened? And I was just like, my book is coming out into the world. Like finally. So it was really exciting.
What a great time.
So I guess our question is kind of to MFA or not to MFA. What's your take on master's programs? Who should consider it? And then when do you think it's not necessary for them?
So I knew going into my MFA that I wanted to be a writer, like for the long term. Like I was like, my goal is to be an author and have multiple books. And like, I saw the MFA not as an investment into getting a job as a professor, which I think is not the best investment to make because there are just so many students with this degree and like not a ton of jobs and not a ton of job security. But for me, it was sort of like, if I am investing in like my entire career as a writer and sort of laying this foundation of writing skills and how to think about rewriting, I think the best skill that I learned in my MFA was how to rewrite my own writing and edit my own self. Whereas before I would be like, I wrote this thing and I don't know how to make it better. Like I said before, like I could edit other people's work, but not my own. And so the process of like honing that rewriting muscle for myself has been the most valuable thing that I learned. So I met students in my program, like there was one student who graduated from undergrad and then started an MFA program like 2 months later because she couldn't find a job and she wanted to defer her loans. I don't think that's a wise course of action. I think also for me, like I said, I went into the program like saying, I have this novel that I want to rewrite. So I knew exactly what I was going to work on. And I think that really served me and was really valuable. I think if you go alternately, if you're like, I want to come out with a book of short stories, or like if you have a specific goal in mind, like I have this novel idea and I want to write the novel. But I think people that went in without a clear vision of what they wanted, like some of my colleagues, I think maybe didn't have as meaningful of an experience and sort of came out with like a few different pieces of work, but like nothing cohesive that they felt like they had accomplished or like we're ready to publish, like that kind of thing. So I think that going in with a clear vision of what you want to get out of it is really helpful. And I think not hanging your hat on getting a job as a professor is crucial. So I think myself and a couple of my other friends from my program have gone into like freelance writing or creating like copywriting businesses. And I think that we've done really well in that space. But I think, again, kind of like hanging your hat on becoming a professor is not necessarily going to pan out as easily.
Can you tell us a little bit about your writing process? You talk on your website, I think, about embodied writing. Do you think you can explain to our listeners what that is?
Yes. So I started creating this process, this embodied writing process, a few months ago, and it was really interesting. So I'm reading this book called Patriarchy Stress Disorder by Dr. Valerie Rain. And one of the things that she talks about in this book, and this is specifically for women, but applies to men as well, is this idea that being a woman in our culture can be really traumatizing. And all of us have experiences that are traumatizing, like ourselves, whether you're a man or a woman, just like being in the world. And she defines trauma as this idea of any experience that you had where your fullest self was like not welcome, right? Like you got shut down or you were, hurt emotionally in some way. And so one of the things that she teaches in this book is this idea that when we experience any kind of trauma, we shut off from like our physical body, right? So like your brain kind of like retreats into your head and you start thinking like, all I am is a brain. And like you kind of experience the world very cerebrally, but not like viscerally. And I started experimenting with this idea of like, okay, so if I were to come back into my body and experience things more physically, like how could I use that in my writing? And so this embodied writing process that I started developing was basically this idea of Okay, so it starts out with before I do any writing. So if I'm working on my new novel, before I start, I sit down with a pen and paper and I just like handwrite for like 5 or 10 minutes. And it's a way to just like get out of my brain, like what I'm thinking about for this book and like what I'm actually feeling right now in my body. And I sort of will do something like, it might just be connecting with myself and sort of asking myself, like, how am I doing today? And sort of Julia Cameron's idea of morning pages, where you just like write 2 or 3 handwritten pages as just like a brain dump before you start something new. And then I also started experimenting with myself and some of the writers that I work with of like, okay, what if we explore what emotions feel like in the physical body and sort of like describe the physical sensations that you experience. And again, this is related to trauma because when your brain experiences a negative experience, again, it kind of like retreats into itself. But when you bring the feeling back into your physical body, like you can explain it so and describe it so much more viscerally than you could if you kind of weren't experiencing it yourself. So we'll do like a basic exercise that I just did with a group of people yesterday was basically like, I was like, hey, we're all feeling a lot of anxiety right now. And so I had them just sort of like sit and write for like 5 minutes, like, what does anxiety like physically feel like to you? And so some people were saying that like their feet get really cold. Like one person was saying that she feels almost like there's like an electric fence around her heart, that there's like this buzzing sensation. Someone else was saying that they get like a tingling feeling in their hands. So again, it's sort of this way of making an emotion, which we can often just like think about and kind of like getting it onto the page in like a really physical and visceral way. People have been finding that both then when they describe emotion, like in their writing, becomes much more sensual. And then also kind of connecting with themselves and their own emotions sort of like unblocks like anything that's been in the way of being able to be creative, kind of like loosens any writing blocks. It kind of like gets your creative juices flowing. Lots of really good stuff in this embodied writing process.
Has that helped you during trying to focus right now?
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes. So what I had people do yesterday was just like, when we started writing about anxiety, I had them just do a worry dump. So like for 3 minutes, you just like write down every single thing you're worried about. And then we also sort of noticed like how many of those things are present for you like right now. So most people were really worried about like future finances, like future work things, but it was sort of like, we're also noticing like right now, it's like the only thing that's happening is you're sitting at your desk or sitting on your chair. And like we were on like a virtual writing call together. And it was like, that's the only thing that's real in this moment. And so being able to connect to that present moment, I think gives rise to a lot of creativity, because creativity is like right now. It's not in the future. If that makes sense.
A virtual writing call seems like a good idea.
Yes. So every Monday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern, I do a virtual writing circle, and we all get on the call on Zoom and we spend 5 or 10 minutes doing an embodied writing exercise. And then everyone writes on their own project for like 45 minutes. And then we share at the end, like what we were working on. It's really fun.
I think that's a good idea, especially for right now.
Definitely.
For sure. I really like this embodied writing idea. Have you heard any of Eve Ensler's TED Talks on?
No. Well, I know who he is, but I haven't heard the TED Talks.
She's kind of written a little bit or talked a little bit about that, like the importance of being in your body and experiencing that before writing. It's really interesting. But yeah, I love that.
I'm going to look that up. Thank you.
What is the best piece of writing advice that you've ever received, or one piece of advice that you think all writers should hear?
I think it's like this combination of like, don't quit, and also like, don't quit writing ever. And also, it's okay to quit a project if it's really not working. So it's sort of very paradoxical, but I think it's sort of like this, don't give up, because what I'm coming to find about writing is sort of that I used to be very focused on the result, like what the book I'm writing, like the essay that I'm writing, just sort of like churning it out, getting it done, handing it in, checking the box. But finding that the writing process has taught me like so much, just like who I've become in the process of writing my book is like so worthwhile. Like whether or not, so I'm so excited that the book is coming out and it's going to like reach readers. But even if it hadn't, like who I became while I was writing about those characters and while I was sort of like determined to write the best book that I could was this person that was like, you know, very disciplined and like would sit down and write every day. As a side note, that was before I had children. So we could talk another time about like whether or not you write every day. So I don't want people who are listening to feel ashamed that they don't write every day because I no longer have the opportunity to write every day. But in any case, like when I was writing my book, I was able to be that disciplined person who like showed up for my writing every day. I was able to go really deep into these characters and also kind of like let the process surprise me. So I think that, again, the person that I became through the writing has been so worthwhile, like whether or not I got the result that I wanted. And I think also there is a point at which it's okay when your project isn't working to like let it go, but work on something else. Don't go into the space of like, oh my gosh, I failed and like I can never be a writer, because I think there are super successful writers all the time that have talked about like writing 100 pages of a book and then being like, this isn't working. I'm gonna do something else.
I think what you're saying, like I see how you think it sounds paradoxical at first, but I think that's absolutely true. Like don't quit writing, but don't like push through a project that's not working for you. Like it takes a little bit of bravery as well to admit like, okay, maybe this isn't actually working.
Yes. And
to the next one.
Sometimes you're so in love with it and then you're just like, but someone else reads it and they're like, and you're like, no, don't tell me this. But it's okay. I mean, it happens to everybody. I read an essay one time by Madeleine L'Engle, who's one of my favorite writers, and she's written so many books. And she talks about that thing of like, she was like 100 pages into a book and her agent was like, no, like just scrap the whole thing and like start from the beginning. And I think I've heard Barbara Kingsolver say something like that too. So anyway, it happens to everybody. So keep writing, but if the project isn't working, you get to do something different.
And I feel like you'll learn something from that like failed project. Like you improved your writing in some way somehow, but like you still continue to go for it.
Yeah.
Do you tend to write more than or work on more than one project at once?
So I tend to do one longer project at a time, but then maybe sometimes have like some smaller projects that I work on like at the same time. So I do have a couple of copywriting clients that I work for. So I do sort of like blog posts and emails and that kind of thing, like shorter term things. And then like blogs that I do for my own website. I haven't done any like, I was just thinking about other shorter projects. I haven't done any like short stories in a while. That might be something that could be fun to just shake up the energy. But I tend to just do one longer book at a time.
I was interested in the contests that you applied to. How did you find the contest, and how do you think people should apply to contests if they're kind of like worried they don't think anything would come out of it?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So I remember one of my MFA professors had recommended contests as like a strategy. And I remember I did some research and I honestly cannot remember. I applied for like a few, but there's something to be said. So one thing to note is a lot of contests have an entry fee. And so it's definitely worth thinking about like, this is not something where you would do what I've heard this called like a spray and pray strategy. You do not want to do that with contests, right? You don't want to apply for like 100 contests and like spend a whole bunch of money. So you might consider like, there are contests that are often very specific to like a certain genre or like a certain type of work that they're looking for. And so you might look for some, and there are sometimes contests based on like where you live or like certain populations like women writers or African-American writers. So you can kind of like look and see if there's anything that fits in terms of like who you are or where you live. In this case, so the Fairfield Book Prize is actually only open to graduates of the Fairfield University MFA program, and there isn't an entry fee. So it's kind of a double-edged sword in that it's a smaller pool of books. However, everyone in there has an MFA, and you know that like they're all like pretty high quality work. And you also know that you're up against books of different genres, right? So they award, like it's open to everyone. So you could be up against a memoir or a book of poetry or a book of short stories or a novel. So it's definitely like, I don't know, it's a little bit more unstable in terms of like thinking about like what you're trying, who else is kind of in the pool. But I don't know that it makes sense if you know that there's a contest that's like they often cost like $25 or $50, which isn't a ton of money. But again, you don't want to be like entering a whole bunch. There are some that have like thousands and thousands of entries, right? And while if you have $25 to spare, that's totally fine. You can always go for it. I think that's another thing that I've been learning, because I reached out to like a pretty big name author to get a blurb, and I was like really afraid to do it. And I was like, I have nothing to lose. And she said yes, which was like so exciting, right? So it's sort of like you have nothing to lose and also except $25 and maybe a little bit of time. So I think you can always apply, but there's also sort of something about like being really strategic about what you go after and sort of saying like, okay, there's these 2 or 3 contests that I feel like really fit my book and fit who I am as a writer, that might make sense, as opposed to, again, kind of doing the spray and pray strategy of like applying to like a whole ton of them.
That's quite the way of putting it.
I know, I was going to say.
That's so funny. I wanted to ask you also, before you started writing, you worked in a nonprofit, is that right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about what you were doing then and whether it has helped or anything that you've taken from that career into your writing career?
It's such an interesting question. Yeah. So I worked for about 8 years at an education nonprofit that's based in New York City, and they train school principals, so school leaders, and they also train kind of district level leaders, so superintendents and kind of like high level school district leaders. There's a couple of things. So I think one thing that I learned in that role, so I had 2 roles. One was kind of like as just a program assistant, and I would kind of like help plan curriculum and put it together and put all the materials together. And then the second role that I had was actually in business development and sales. So I would kind of go out to districts and sort of pitch our leadership services. And I think there was something especially in that marketing role that has really helped me learn how to market my own work. And what I mean by there's kind of 2 parts. I think one part is I would go out and sell these like $100,000 packages, and I would have like no fear, because I'm like, I know that the people who are delivering this work are like top notch. Like I know them, I work with them, we do really high quality work. And like, I really believed in their product, right? And so there was also this separation. Like when people said no, I like didn't care because I was just like, it's your loss, right? I had this like feeling of like, it's your loss and like, you're missing out on what we offer and whatever. And so I think that like taking that with me into my own writing and being able to like, it's almost like I have this marketing persona and it's still me, but it's like, I am representing like writer me. And it's not that like I become this like sleazy marketer by any means, because I'm very like authentic in my marketing, but also like I represent writer Brooke, and I don't ever feel bad if like people don't sign up for my email list or like whatever. Like I'm just sort of like, you're missing out, like, because writer Brooke is putting out some great content over here, right? And so there's something about that, being able to like not take it as personally as I think I would have before having that role was really helpful. And I think this kind of goes more to, I have some writing clients where I think having that role and kind of like working with a nonprofit, I learned how to write in different voices. So I would write, there were some like blogs and things that are like things that I would write as like the COO. And there were things that I would write as sort of like one of the facilitators. And there were things that I would write that were sort of more like, I used to do a catalog of our courses so that were more like corporate sounding. And I learned kind of how to like shift my voice based on like what the need was. And I think that's helped me both writing for my clients and also even like now when I'm writing like my own characters, it's sort of like a little bit easier for me to be like, this person has this very clear voice and this person has this very clear voice. So it kind of helped me hone that muscle as well.
So on your website, you say something about how you don't like to use sales copy, or at least in terms of like, you don't want it to sound salesy, right?
Yeah.
So with a background in marketing, and presumably you've kind of been trained to use sales copy, how do you do marketing without that? I guess.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. This is such
Does
a
that
great
make
question.
sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
this is such a great question, because I also like a year or 2 ago, I used to market myself as someone who wrote sales copy. And then I was basically like, I think on my website, I say like, I'm allergic to sales copy,
Yes.
which is like the truth, which is so funny because of everything I just said. But I think what I've come into is sort of like, and again, now that I'm writing for myself and like I have a handful of clients who are like coaches or just sort of have a very like authentic voice that they want to portray, it's sort of much more. So basically, I'll tell you the story that where this came from. So one of my clients owns a home renovation company in actually right in and around New York City. And we started finding, so I've been working with her for like a year, and we were doing all the things that home renovation companies do, like for the website, and we're doing videos, and we're doing building the email list, and kind of like doing all of these things. And then one day we wrote this story that was like, she was kind of wanting to transition into talking more about this concept that for her, transforming your home and your physical environment is really about transforming your life. And she was seeing in her clients that like when they would redo their bathroom, all of a sudden they would get a new job, or they would like decide to have a baby. Like they would make these big life decisions and these big life changes, like because they had made this big change to their home. And she was like, that's what I want to talk about. And so we wrote this email that was basically like, we're going to start telling more personal stories about personal transformation and like this journey, like this like life journey that we're all on together. And we basically said in her voice, like, I don't really know where this is going to lead. Like, I don't know if this is going to be a total flop. And if people are going to like, we just don't know. And people like loved it. Like they were just like, oh my gosh, like this is amazing. And so I sort of had this moment of thinking like, oh, so everyone in the online business world that I'm sort of tangentially a part of is all about like wanting more clicks and more readership and more signups and like all these things. And like, but actually you get all those things just by being vulnerable. Like people want the next trick of like, what are the words that I should use? What color should my button be? And we started finding that like just by being vulnerable, like it just like attracted people like so much. And that wasn't the aim even. Like the aim was just like that authentic connection. But what we found was that people really resonated with it. So instead of using sales copy, I started using just vulnerability.
I love that. I also wonder how it plays into the situation that we're in now with COVID and people who are seeking connection maybe more than they ever have before because everyone is sort of isolated together. How are you finding this particular situation, like with your business, with being at home? Like how has that changed the way you operate?
This is super interesting. So my husband and I have 2 small kids, like I said at the beginning, and it's been really intense. I'm not going to like sugarcoat that at all. So we actually do have a little bit of childcare where in Connecticut where we are, you are allowed to have like a home babysitter if they don't babysit like elsewhere. So we have our next door neighbors have 2 middle school age girls and they come over and watch our daughter. And the first few weeks they were also watching our son and he just like revolted. He's having a really hard time emotionally of like, does not want to be with other people, wants to be with us like all the time. And so
how old is he?
He's going to be 4. So we're kind of doing this thing where I have basically set my business and writing hours from like 8 to 12. Like that's the time that I have. And it's sort of like, if it doesn't get done in that time, like, oh, well, so it's just sort of, we're just sort of getting done what we can. And I think the challenge for us has really been sort of how do we help him to know that like it's going to be okay when also there's like he understands some things but obviously not everything, and I think he's picking up on just like the general uncertainty. But yeah, it's been a challenge of like making parenting, marriage, like friendships, kind of like business like work. And I think, I'm not saying that I have like any answers, but my husband and I had a conversation last night where my husband is a pastor. And so one of his professors had just written from seminary, had just written this article that I think was in the Wall Street Journal. And it was all about so this man's wife is like dying of cancer right now. And he was talking about this idea that like, in the Middle Ages, the Christian church had this idea of the art of dying. And it was all about sort of like, who do you talk to? What do you talk about? Like there was sort of like this set of practices around like how to die well, which is not something that we ever talk about in our culture. But he was talking about how the pandemic has like reminded all of us, for better or for worse, that he said, no one gets out of this life alive. And like, how do we live well? Sort of like knowing that. And so my husband and I had this really intense conversation last night of just like, we've both been trying to maintain work like at the same level. And it's been really stressful. And so we were just saying like, what if like this time was just more of a family time. And like we let go of some of these good things that we're doing at work and just trust that like there will be more time for that later. And it was hard for both of us because I think we were both like, but we really love these things that we're doing. Like we kind of miss that professional like satisfaction in some ways. And not to say that we're going to stop working, but just sort of like dial back like certain things for a season. And so it was kind of intense, but I think a good conversation of sort of like, what do we want to prioritize during this time? And what do we want to carry forward when this time is over? So I think, yeah, sort of like recognizing we don't have to, we both have like things that we want to achieve and we have goals. And also maybe how we go about the goals is more important than getting there a little faster. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. It really is such a strange time. And I think that the kind of pressure to be really productive or to write more than you ever have before is a lot. Do you have a lot of interaction with a writer community, or do you have a community of writers that you interact with or that help you along your writing journey?
My best friend actually is also a writer, and her first book is coming out next spring. So we've been like on this journey together of writing books together and now getting published together, which is so fun. And so she and I think, talk a lot about writing and just sort of like how to go about this whole crazy journey. And I think both of us had the experience of rewriting our books like multiple times. Like I think she restructured hers. It's a memoir. I think she restructured hers like 3 or 4 times before it sold and like now, like before it got to its final form. So I think also just cheering each other on of like, it really is good work. Like keep the faith. Cause like there have been times where both of us were like, this is just for the birds. Like we're just done. So I think having her to sort of bounce ideas off of, and also sometimes I'm like, I have no idea if this chapter is good. Like, just tell me what you think. Like having her eye on it has been really helpful as well. And then it's so funny because at the end of February, I led my first in-person writing retreat and it was so amazing. And I was like, I want to do this all the time. And then like 2 weeks later, it was like everything just like completely shut down in the Northeast US at least. So I think, so on that retreat, I had 6 women writers and myself, and it was really powerful to kind of be in that writing community and in that writing space. And everyone was like, starting a book. Like none of them had ever written books before, but it just so happened that everyone who signed up was in that space of wanting to start a book. And so I used a lot of the embodied writing techniques that I talked about. And it was really interesting because several people said afterwards that they had this idea that their book was going to be, social commentary or very research based. And like 2 or 3 of them were like, actually, like it's going to be my story. And like, there's going to be these other elements kind of like woven in. But I was so pleased that like opening up that space and that sort of like embodied writing connection was able to get them to go really deep into their story. Because I think even if you're writing social commentary or like a scholarly article, like when you have that connection to the story, I feel like it's so much more compelling. So yes, I've been coming up with some ways to involve people virtually, especially during this time, but I hope to do more in-person retreats like in the future when it's safe.
That's awesome. Was it a residential thing? Were you away somewhere?
Yes. So I held it at the same place. So my MFA program was a low residency MFA. So we would travel twice a year for 10 days and like live away and like take class together. And so I actually held my first retreat at that same location, which was so fun. So the location is called Ender's Island and it's off the coast of Mystic, Connecticut. So it's like very New England coastal environment. It's right on the Sound. And it's just a really beautiful location. So it was very cold when we were there in February, but it was just really beautiful and really fun to kind of have that residency aspect. And also like a lot of the women like myself are young moms. And so everyone was just like, no one needs me. Like they're going to feed me 3 meals a day. Like I don't have to cook. Like there's something really powerful about that aspect of sort of like being away and being able to like take that time just for yourself and your writing.
How lovely that you got to do that before the world locked down.
Yes.
Like, what a nice thing to be able to do.
Good timing there.
Sounds beautiful as well.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes.
So you're talking about like authenticity and marketing and how you've kind of decided what needs to stay to do your job right now. So I'm wondering how that's affected your marketing for your first book. Like, have you changed the strategy, or is it the same one that you had from the beginning?
Yeah, so I think the strategy hasn't changed. I think the timing will likely change. Like I said, we're talking about pushing the release back to like February 2021, which I actually suggested it to my publisher, and he was like, I have never had anyone come to me and want to push their book back. He was like, writers always want the book to come out as soon as possible. And I just said, so basically they had talked about like they had to push some of their spring release dates, or they were choosing to do that. And so he was like, we might have to push to Halloween. And I had had a conversation with another person I know in the publishing industry who I met through my business. And he just said, like, if you can't publish by October 1st, you really want to wait until like the new year, because there's just so much happening with the holidays. And he said a lot of like Christmas books come out. And he said it's just hard to make an impact, like, because there's so much advertising like noise. So in any case, I called my editor and I was like, what if we push back to like February? And he was like, I've never had anyone ask me that, but I think it's a good idea. So we're still exploring that as an option. So in terms of the marketing for the book, I actually worked with a woman named Melissa Casera, and she is a publicist who used to work for like a traditional New York City publicist firm, like publicity firm. And now she has her own business. And she basically worked with me I could not afford a full-on publicist who like does all the work for you, but she did like a 1-day sort of like strategy session with me where she helped me come up with a whole strategy for the book. And so I'm just implementing it myself. So one of the strategies that I'm doing is actually a virtual book club, which is another fun virtual way to connect with people. So mine is called the Reading Circle. And basically, I had started out doing like a traditional book club format where like we read a book every month and like talk about it. And I was finding that like a lot of people were like, I'm in 2 other book clubs and like I don't have time to like read like another book. So I basically changed the format to be similar to this book I love called The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. I see you guys nodding.
I just watched that movie this weekend.
And the movie is on Netflix and it's so great. Yes. So the book, basically, they don't have a set book. Everyone just reads whatever they want. And then they come together and they just like talk about their favorite books, and they would like argue, and they would say like, this is why you need to read this book. And they would kind of like make this like impassioned case for like why you should read XYZ. So I kind of changed the format to be more of that. So we just have people in there who are like, oh my gosh, I'm reading this and it's amazing. Or like, I just heard about this, or I met this writer and like, she's reading this and, you know, this is her book or whatever. So it's been really fun just to connect with people around books. And at our last virtual like live meeting, we just had someone, I was like, does anyone like want a specific kind of recommendation? And so somebody was like, I just want something fun and light that's kind of like escapism. And so we gave her like 4 or 5 recommendations just from like the people that were on that call. So it was really fun. And we also, this is like so nerdy, but we also do like live reading time. So we get on Zoom and just like read together like silently, because why not?
I kind of like that.
Yeah.
Can I just say, this sounds like working at Kobo, because that is Kobo. Everybody has different reading tastes, and everyone like comes in and talks about what they're reading, and nobody's really ever reading the same thing. But it's, yeah, I love it. It's so dorky, fun. And it's the best.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So yeah, so this is part of it's like the marketing strategy, quote unquote, but it's really just like me connecting with other people who love to read, which is so fun. And it feels like very authentic to me of like I posted my book cover just got finished by the designer, and I posted in the group, and everyone was like, I can't wait to read it. And I was like, I can't wait for you to read it. Like, but it's also really the space where like we just nerd out together, and people give me book recommendations all the time, and it's really lovely. So I think that's a big part of my quote unquote marketing strategy. And I think the other part is connecting with different podcasts and just talking to book and writing podcasts. And also, this is just like a fun thing, but I'm working on a book trailer to release on like YouTube and market. So that's just kind of a fun project that I'm doing too.
Will you send it to us when it's done? Please?
Totally. It's almost done.
There's some really cool book trailers out there. And it's not like something I've ever really known about until we started doing this podcast. I'd never seen one before, but there's some really beautiful ones. They're just like a fun, creative thing.
Totally.
So what's the title of your book? And then can you tell us what you're working on next?
Yes. So the title of my book is Catchlight, and I'll just give you like the 2-sentence description. So Catchlight is the story of the Keene family and its 4 grown siblings. They can't stand to be in the same room together, and their mother is diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and it's basically like, what now? Like, how do we come together and take care of her without totally imploding? So that's Catchlight. And again, we're probably looking at spring 2021, still slated for October. We'll see what happens. And then my next book, which I want to spend more time working on, it's a young adult book. And sort of the tagline is, when the president's 17-year-old daughter disappears from a fashion show in Paris, her best friend finds herself in the middle of all this controversy, right? So the best friend knows something that she's not telling, and it's sort of the story of like what unfolds.
I'm intrigued.
That sounds like fun. Yeah.
It's really fun.
And then where can listeners find you online?
My website is brookeadamslaw.com. It's Brooke with an E. People often think I'm a lawyer, but I'm not. So brookeadamslaw.com. And I'm also really active on Facebook. So you can either friend me or follow my page is also Brooke Adams Law.
Awesome.
If you want to come write virtually with us on my website, there's a bar at the top that says come write live with me, and you can sign up for the writing circle. It's Monday mornings at 10 a.m.
Cool.
Eastern.
10 a.m. EST? Right.
Yep.
That's so cool. Can you tell us what you have been loving lately, whether it's a book or a movie or a podcast or whatever?
So 2 things. So I recently discovered this podcast, What Should I Read Next? Have you heard of this? So
No.
Anne Bogle is a writer. So she has a website called The Modern Mrs. Darcy, I think, but her podcast is What Should I Read Next? And basically she has conversations with readers, and they tell her 3 books they love, 1 book they didn't love, and then she will recommend to them like 3 or 4 books that they should read next.
I'm intrigued by this. Mm-hmm.
It's fun, yeah. And so one of the books that I just heard about on her podcast, I just finished reading like 2 days ago, and it was fantastic. So it just came out. It's called Codename Helene by Ariel Lawhon. And so Codename Helene, it's a novel, but it's about the true story of this woman, Nancy Wake, who was like an Australian expat living in Paris. She not cons exactly, but she bluffs her way into being a journalist, totally has no credentials whatsoever. Because with journalists in Paris, her first or second interview is with Adolf Hitler in the 30s, the early 1930s. And basically in the 40s, she becomes a spy for the French resistance. And she's embedded with the French resistance and sort of giving them orders. And she's associated somehow with the British secret intelligence. It's really good. So
this does look good. And it's a fictionalized memoir based, or not memoir, but
yeah, it's a novel, but it's based on a real person. Yeah.
Is the thing about her interviewing Hitler true? And
true, totally true.
Yeah, this does look good. Thank you. That's a great recommendation.
We'll have links to everything you mentioned on our blog for anyone interested.
Awesome.
But yeah, it's been so great talking to you.
Thank you. This has been so much fun. Thank you both.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. If you're interested in purchasing Brooke's debut novel, Catchlight, it releases October 5th. And if you're interested in learning how to grow your sales, visit KoboWritingLife.com.
This episode was produced by Joni DiPlacido and Stephanie McGrath, with assistance from Rachel Wharton. Editing was done by Kelly Robotham. Music is provided by Tearjerker, and big thanks to Brooke for being a guest today.
If you're ready to start your self-publishing journey today, sign up for free at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing!